I hadn't expected the courtroom to fall into silence the second I stepped inside, but it did. Dozens of eyes snapped toward me at once, some filled with curiosity, others heavy with judgment, and two of them openly amused in a way that felt all too familiar. My parents sat at the plaintiff's table, their expressions already laced with that same dismissive look they used to give me as a child when I stood invisible in front of them, asking for attention that never came. Their lawyer, a tall man dressed in a sharply pressed navy suit, carried himself with an air of certainty, flipping through his papers like the outcome was already written in his favor. But the instant the judge looked up and saw me, something shifted. His movement stilled, his brows lifted in recognition, then he leaned forward, narrowing his eyes as if confirming what he thought he saw. "Wait, you're Jag, ma'am?" The confidence drained from their attorney's face in real time, and in that suspended moment as my parents' smug expressions cracked and faded, I understood something with absolute clarity. Every year of my life, all 38 of them, had led me here, to a moment I had never wanted, yet one I was completely prepared to face. My name is Sarah Lawson, and this is how my wealthy grandmother left me $4.7 million, and how the same parents who ignored me my entire childhood tried to take it all away. But to understand how we ended up in that courtroom, you have to go back to the beginning. I grew up in a small Midwestern town called Maple Falls. It was the kind of place where summer carried the scent of freshly cut grass, and winter mornings meant waking before sunrise just to shovel snow from the driveway. Life wasn't glamorous there, but it was steady, predictable in a way that only towns with a single diner and a handful of churches can be. My biological parents, Daniel and Linda Lawson, were once the pride of that town. My father had been the high school quarterback, the kind of man people remembered long after graduation. My mother had been the smiling cheerleader with a sharp wit behind her charm. They married young, full of ambition, convinced their future would be bigger than Maple Falls could contain. Then I was born. I don't believe they ever truly hated me, but I know I was never part of their plan. I was the interruption, the responsibility they hadn't accounted for, the crying child in the night while they argued about money, missed opportunities, and the life they believed they deserved. By the time I was barely 2, they left me with my grandmother for a while, promising they just needed time to get back on their feet. They never came back. My grandmother, Margaret Lawson, didn't look like someone wealthy. There were no designer clothes, no luxury cars. She wore worn cardigans, baked blueberry muffins every Sunday morning, and spoke with a calm, steady authority that made people listen without raising her voice. Her wealth came quietly, built over decades of running small hardware stores and making smart property investments when others hesitated. Around town, people called her the quiet millionaire. When I was 5, I thought she was magic. By 10, I knew she was my entire world, and by 15, I understood she was everything I wanted to become: strong without cruelty, kind without weakness, fair in a way that never wavered. She never spoke badly about my parents, not when they missed birthdays, not when they forgot holidays, not even when they appeared out of nowhere every few years asking for money, pretending concern just long enough to make their request sound reasonable. Grandma always refused them the same way, calmly, politely, without anger. Then she would squeeze my hand and say, "Some people grow straight, sweetheart, others don't, and no matter how hard you try, you can't force a crooked tree to stand tall." It took me years to fully understand what she meant. She introduced me to the law without ever calling it that. She would attend local hearings, manage contracts for her properties, and come home with stories. Stories about families fighting over land, about siblings tearing each other apart over inheritance, about how money doesn't change people, it reveals them. Sometimes she let me sit beside her as she reviewed paperwork. I remember loving the certainty of it, the clarity of words written in black and white. Rules that didn't shift depending on someone's mood. It grounded me in a way nothing else did. By the time I reached my final year of high school, I knew what I wanted. I wanted to protect people like her, people who did things the right way but still found themselves vulnerable in a world full of loopholes and opportunists. She supported me through everything: applications, exams, interviews, and when I raised my hand and took my oath to serve as a judge advocate officer in the United States Navy, she was there. My parents weren't. They sent a short message, "Congrats, do well." It didn't hurt the way it once would have. It just felt empty. Grandma hugged me afterward, her arms tight around me, her voice soft but steady. "I'm proud of you. You'll make things right where others don't." Years later, I would understand just how much those words mattered. When I was 36, she passed away peacefully, her hand in mine. I thought losing her would be the hardest thing I'd ever face. I was wrong, because my parents returned, smiling too wide, acting like grief belonged to them, asking what they had been left. And when they discovered the answer was nothing, they took me to court. They accused me of manipulating the woman who raised me, of stealing what they believed should have been theirs. That's how we ended up there, in that courtroom, with $4.7 million, a lifetime of truth, and a legacy my grandmother trusted me to defend. In Maple Falls, if you asked who raised me, no one would say my parents. They would say Margaret Lawson's granddaughter, and they would say it with warmth, because she had that effect on people. She was the woman who remembered birthdays decades later, who baked pies for neighbors without being asked, who waved at everyone like they mattered. And somehow she raised me to believe the world, even with its flaws, still leaned toward good. My earliest memories weren't toys or vacations. They were simple things. The smell of cornbread, the sound of her humming while folding laundry, the creak of her rocking chair as she read to me by the fire. She told stories, not grand ones, but meaningful ones, about building her business from nothing, about trust, about discipline, about integrity. And she didn't just talk about those values, she lived them. While other kids spent weekends watching cartoons, I was learning how to sweep store aisles, organize shelves, balance ledgers, not because she needed help, but because she was preparing me. "Life doesn't wait for you to be ready," she'd say, "so you learn early." I didn't mind. I liked knowing I was capable. I liked earning her quiet nod of approval. My parents, on the other hand, remained distant figures. They came and went like storms, loud, disruptive, temporary, always leaving behind tension, never staying long enough to fix anything. One moment stands out clearly. I was 12. My father stood in the doorway arguing with Grandma about money, insisting he just needed one good investment to turn things around. She didn't raise her voice. She simply said, "I don't invest in people who refuse to learn from their mistakes." He left angry. My mother followed without a word to me. Grandma didn't chase them. She just turned back to me and said, "Come help me with dinner." That was her way. Keep moving forward. In high school, I wasn't popular, I wasn't outgoing. I was the dependable one, the quiet one, the girl teachers trusted. Then everything changed when a Navy recruiter visited our school. I barely planned to listen until he said something that caught my full attention. "You can serve your country as a lawyer." That moment changed everything. I went home and told Grandma. She listened, then smiled softly. "If that's your path, I'll walk it with you as long as I can." And she did, every step of the way. Years passed. Service shaped me. Discipline refined me. I built a career, a purpose, and every time I came home, she seemed a little older, a little more fragile, but never weaker in spirit. One winter, she handed me a folder. "You'll understand this later," she said. I didn't realize then how much that folder would change my life. The call about her passing came on a quiet evening. I remember the silence that followed, the way everything stopped. I flew home the next morning, and instead of grief, I was met with something else entirely. My parents waiting. And from that moment on, everything began to unravel. The morning of the hearing arrived cold and gray. The sky stretched out like steel above the town. I stood in front of Grandma's mirror, adjusting my suit. my gaze drifting again and again to the Navy JAG insignia resting nearby. I hadn't planned to wear it. I hadn't planned to reveal that part of myself. But her voice echoed in my mind. Truth is a shield. So I picked it up and pinned it in place. Outside, the snow crunched beneath my boots as I stepped forward. Maple Falls was just beginning to wake. Lights flickered on, chimneys released thin streams of smoke. The town moved slowly, unaware of what the day would bring. At the edge of the driveway, I stopped. I turned back once, looking at the house. Her house. The wind rustled the wind chimes on the porch, and for a moment I swear I heard her voice. "Stand tall, sweetheart." So I did. The courthouse was already buzzing when I arrived. A local reporter raised her camera, but I kept my head down. This wasn't a spectacle. This was my life, my grandmother's legacy. Inside, I took my seat at the defendant's table beside attorney Evelyn Howe, who adjusted her glasses and whispered, "You're calm. Good. That'll rattle them." Across from us sat my parents. My mother wore a black coat with a faux fur collar, her chin lifted in manufactured grief. My father sat stiffly, jaw clenched, eyes cutting toward me with something between resentment and anticipation. Then their attorney, Richard Gable, walked in with the swagger of a man who believed he'd already won. He glanced at us, gave a smug half-smile, and sat down. The bailiff called out, "All rise." Judge Michael Hanover entered, a stern man in his 60s, with a gavel-worn expression. He'd served the county for decades and had a reputation for sniffing out lies from a mile away. But what I didn't expect was the way he froze when his eyes met mine. He leaned forward, slightly squinting. "Excuse me," he said slowly, "but are you JAG, ma'am?" His voice echoed through the silent room. Gable's confident grin flickered. My mother's expression faltered. My father stiffened visibly. I rose politely. "Yes, Your Honor. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Lawson, United States Navy Judge Advocate General's Corps." A ripple of whispers passed through the courtroom. Judge Hanover straightened in his seat. "Well," he said softly, "that changes things." And just like that, the ground shifted. Gable recovered first. "Your Honor," he began, clearing his throat, "my clients maintain that Miss Lawson—" "Lieutenant Commander," Judge Hanover corrected sharply. Gable blinked. "Lieutenant Commander Lawson manipulated her grandmother, an elderly woman with declining capacity." Judge Hanover looked at him over the rim of his glasses. "Based on what evidence?" Gable gestured broadly. "There were behavioral changes. My clients will testify that Margaret Lawson became distant, distracted, and financially erratic." My father nodded vigorously. "She wasn't herself anymore." My mother sniffed. She was confused. I remained still, quiet. Let them talk. Gable continued. "The will was changed only a year before her passing, a suspiciously convenient time, right after Miss Lawson returned from deployment." Judge Hanover turned to Evelyn. "Your witness wishes to respond." Evelyn stood, flipping open her folder with deliberate calm. "Your Honor, we have medical records, cognitive assessments, and statements from her long-term physician confirming Margaret Lawson's full mental capacity at the time the will was updated." She handed the documents to the clerk. Gable tried to interject, but Judge Hanover held up a hand. "Mr. Gable, I don't need commentary. I can read." My parents' faces fell. Then Evelyn added, "And we have her diary." My breath caught. Evelyn carefully lifted the worn leather book and set it on the evidence table. This was in Margaret's possession until her death. It contains entries referencing her son's past financial recklessness, his attempts to solicit money, and her concern that he would attempt to claim her assets after she passed. Judge Hanover opened the diary to a marked page. Silence filled the room. He read slowly. "Daniel has not changed. He takes, then asks for more. I love him, but I cannot trust him with what I've built. Sarah is steady, strong, and fair. I leave my life's work to the person who earned it through the way she lives." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's eyes burned with something I couldn't name. Gable tried again, voice cracking. Your Honor, diaries are emotional, not factual. Judge Hanover closed the book with a soft thud that silenced the whole courtroom. This is the voice of a competent woman making a thoughtful decision, he said firmly, not the ramblings of someone confused. I exhaled slowly, one step closer. Next came testimony. My parents claimed I pulled away from them, that I alienated Grandma, that I used my military background to intimidate her. But every accusation fell apart under cross-examination. Evelyn asked simple questions. How often did you visit your mother? How much financial support did you provide? When was the last birthday you spent with her? Do you have any written proof that she expressed confusion or coercion? My parents fumbled through vague answers, contradicting themselves repeatedly. But the moment that broke everything open came when Evelyn asked, Mr. Lawson, how much money did you ask your mother for in the last 15 years? Dad sputtered, irrelevant. Judge Hanover responded, highly relevant. Answer the question. My father's face reddened. I don't remember. Evelyn pressed. More than 20,000? I said I don't remember. More than 50? Silence. The courtroom watched him unravel. Finally, Evelyn said, Your Honor, we have bank statements. It was over. Even Gable stopped objecting. My parents looked small. Not monstrous, not evil, just small, like people who had spent so long trying to fill a hole inside themselves with money that they no longer knew where the hole ended. When testimonies ended, Judge Hanover rubbed his temples, then removed his glasses. This court has heard sufficient evidence. I will issue my ruling shortly. My heart pounded as we waited. 5 minutes, 10, 15. Finally, he returned. He looked at me first, then at my parents, then at the packed courtroom. After reviewing the evidence, testimony, and legal documents, this court finds no indication of undue influence or diminished capacity. My breath trembled. Judge Hanover continued, The will of Margaret Lawson stands exactly as written. All assets remain with Lieutenant Commander Sarah Lawson. A murmur of relief moved through the room. My parents sagged in their seats. Judge Hanover added quietly, Justice does not always follow blood. Sometimes it follows character. The words struck something deep inside me. As the gavel fell, I felt a weight lift, not just from winning, but from finally seeing the truth laid bare. When the gavel struck, it was supposed to feel like victory, but sitting there in the silence after Judge Hanover's ruling, all I felt was a strange, aching heaviness, like the air had thickened around me. My parents remained frozen at the plaintiff's table, as if the verdict hadn't fully reached them yet. My mother stared at the polished wood, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. My father leaned back, jaw clenched, eyes glassy with something I couldn't identify. Anger, humiliation, loss? Maybe all three. Attorney Gable collected his papers without his usual cocky expression. He didn't even look at me as he closed his briefcase. He only muttered to my parents, We can discuss options later. But there were no options left. The will stood. Grandma's voice had spoken, and justice, real justice, had been served. When Gable stepped out of the courtroom, the tension snapped like a rubber band. My mother suddenly stood, gathering her purse so quickly she nearly dropped it. This isn't fair, she whispered harshly, her voice trembling. It isn't fair to us. My father rose more slowly. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in decades, not through anger or resentment, but through something gentler, something raw. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. My mother tugged at his sleeve. Let's go, Daniel. He hesitated, then followed her out. No screaming, no final threat, no dramatic exit, just silence. When the courtroom emptied, Evelyn placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. You handled yourself with grace, Sarah. I don't feel graceful, I whispered. You don't have to. Evelyn gave me a small, almost maternal smile. "You did right by your grandmother. That's all that matters." I nodded, my throat tight. As I packed my folders, I felt eyes on me. I turned to see Judge Hanover standing just outside his chambers. He approached slowly, his expression softened from the stern one he wore on the bench. "Lieutenant Commander Lawson," he said. "Yes, Your Honor?" He paused, searching my face. "I knew your grandmother years ago. She once helped my wife during a difficult time with our first home. I never forgot her kindness." Warmth spread through me. "She never mentioned that." "She wouldn't," he said with a quiet smile. "She didn't help people for praise." "Neither do you, sir." He folded his hands. "You carry yourself a lot like her. She'd be proud of the woman you've become." That did it. The tears came fast, hot, stinging, impossible to hold back. I looked away, embarrassed, but the judge shook his head gently. "No shame in loving those who raised you right." I managed to whisper, "Thank you." He nodded once, then returned to chambers. Evelyn squeezed my arm. "Come on, let's get you home." The drive back to Grandma's house felt surreal. Snowflakes drifted lazily across the windshield, clinging to the edges like tiny reminders of winter's quiet persistence. Maple Falls looked the same as it always did, small, humble, charming. But everything felt different now. I was different now. When we pulled into the driveway, I thanked Evelyn and watched her car disappear down the road. Then I stood alone on the porch listening to the wind chimes. Grandma's chimes. Grandma's porch. Grandma's world. Mine now. Inside the house, Sadie greeted me with the scent of cinnamon and dust. Familiar, comforting, heartbreaking. I wandered into the living room and sank into her old armchair, pulling a quilt over my lap. Her diary sat on the side table where I'd left it. I picked it up and opened to a random page from 15 years ago. "I worry about Daniel. He has such a good heart buried somewhere inside him. I pray life brings him humility before it brings him ruin." I closed the book gently. Some prayers take time. Some converge with pain. Some don't bloom until you least expect them. A soft knock startled me. I opened the door to find my father standing alone on the porch, snow collecting on his shoulders. For a moment, we just looked at each other. He seemed smaller somehow, older, as if the courtroom had stripped away layers he'd spent years hiding behind. "Can I?" he started, gesturing inside. I hesitated but stepped aside. He entered slowly, almost reverently, as if the house itself demanded respect. His eyes lingered on the photos, the mantle, the old family Bibles still on the shelf. He finally turned to me. "I'm not here to fight," he said quietly, "or ask for money." His voice cracked a little. That alone was enough to twist something inside my chest. "I read the diary," he continued, "before the hearing. I found it on the evidence table. I shouldn't have, but I did." My heart tightened. "She wrote about me," he whispered, "about things I didn't want to see, things I pretended weren't true." I stayed silent. He swallowed. "I wasn't a good son to her, and I wasn't a good father to you." My breath hitched, but I remained still. "I always thought money was the bridge I could walk across to make things right," he said. "But I see now money was the fire burning the bridge down." He stepped closer. "I'm not asking forgiveness," he said gently. "Only a chance, a small one, just to talk, to try again." My eyes filled with tears. "You hurt me," I whispered. "I know," he said, voice breaking. "And if you'd rather I leave, I will, but I never want to hurt you again." For a long moment, all I heard was the ticking of Grandma's old clock. Finally, I nodded, a tiny nod, but a nod. He exhaled shakily. "Thank you," he whispered. We sat on the sofa, not talking, not rebuilding, not yet, just sitting, and maybe that was enough for now. Later that night, after he left, I stepped onto the porch and looked up at the frosted moon. The town was quiet, still, peaceful. I pressed my hand to the wooden railing, feeling the grain beneath my palm, the same place Grandma used to rest her hand when she watched the sunset. Justice isn't about punishment, she once told me. It's about guiding hearts back to truth. Maybe that's what was happening now. Maybe justice had done more than protect my inheritance. Maybe it had cracked something open, something buried, something stubborn, something capable of healing. And for the first time since the lawsuit began, I let myself hope. In the weeks after the court ruling, Maple Falls felt different. Not because the buildings changed or the seasons shifted, but because I had. It was as if a weight I'd carried my entire life had finally loosened, letting me breathe without bracing for the next blow. Yet victory, true victory, never feels as sharp as the moment it's won. It settles slowly, like snow on a quiet street. The day after my father visited, I found myself waking early, the pale winter sun spilling through the curtains. I brewed tea the way Grandma taught me, slowly, patiently, letting the leaves steep just right. The house felt warmer somehow, not because anything had changed, but because something inside me had. Healing always begins quietly. I stepped outside, steaming cup in hand, and walked down the porch steps. The yard was covered in fresh snow, soft as cotton, untouched except for a few rabbit tracks. The air had that crispness only small-town mornings can hold, the kind that makes you feel like the world is starting over right along with you. I stood there a long moment, breathing, letting the cold burn my lungs clean. That's when I heard footsteps crunching behind me. I turned. My father stood at the end of the driveway, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, head slightly bowed. I didn't speak. Neither did he. We simply stared, unsure if yesterday's fragile truce would hold. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Morning." I nodded. "Morning." He hesitated, kicked at the snow like he used to when I was a kid. "I brought something." From his pocket, he pulled out a small box wrapped in worn newspaper. With slow steps, he approached and held it out to me. I took it carefully. Inside was an old Polaroid photo, one I'd never seen before. My grandmother sat on a porch swing, holding me as a baby, bundled in a pink blanket. My father stood behind her, younger, smiling, really smiling, before life bent him the wrong way. "I found it," he whispered, "in a drawer at my place. Thought you might want it." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I said softly, "Thank you." He nodded and looked away, swallowing hard. "I don't know where to begin," he said. "I've messed up more than I can count. I hurt you, hurt her, hurt myself." His voice trembled and he blinked fast, like he was fighting something inward. "I can't change what I did," he whispered, "but I want to change now." I studied him, the slump in his shoulders, the cracks in his voice, the way he wouldn't quite meet my eyes. For the first time, I didn't see the father who abandoned me. I saw the man who never learned how to be better. "That starts with honesty," I said gently. He winced but nodded. "I know, and I'm ready." It didn't erase the pain, didn't undo the years, didn't heal everything in a single breath, but it was a beginning, and beginnings matter. Later that afternoon, I drove into town to pick up groceries. Maple Falls was busy with holiday preparations, lights strung between lampposts, shop windows painted with snowflakes, wreaths hanging from every door. People bustled along the sidewalks, bundled in scarves and mittens. Inside the small market, Mrs. Turner from the pharmacy waved at me. "Sarah, good news travels fast. Your grandmother would be proud." "Thank you," I replied. Others came up too. Kind words, pats on the shoulder, warm smiles. Not because I'd won, because Maple Falls had loved Margaret Lawson, and they understood that what happened in court was bigger than money. It was about respect, legacy, fairness. At checkout, the young clerk looked at the JAG insignia on my coat and said, "Ma'am, thank you for your service." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "You're welcome." Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of church bells. I paused, listening. Grandma used to say bells were reminders, gentle nudges that life was still happening all around us. I let the sound settle in my chest. Then I drove home. That evening, as twilight blurred into night, I sat in the living room with Grandma's diary open in my lap. I turned to the last page, the one she wrote just weeks before her passing. "Justice is not a fight, it is a way of living. May Sarah carry that truth, and may it guide her steps even when the world is unkind." I pressed my fingers to the ink, the indentations where her pen once moved, and I felt her with me, a quiet peace, a steady presence. That's when the phone rang. My mother's name lit the screen. It took me a moment before I answered. "Sarah," she said, her voice unsteady. I heard your father visited." "Yes?" A shaky breath. "I know I've made mistakes. A lot of them. I don't expect anything. But if one day you'd be willing to sit with me too, I'd like that." Her words were uncertain, fragile, but real. "I'm not ready," I said, honestly. "I understand." A pause. "But I'll wait." For the first time in perhaps my entire life, she meant it. When I hung up, the house felt fuller, as if Grandma's walls had exhaled, relieved that something broken was finally beginning to mend. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into restoring the property. I repainted the porch railings, fixed the old gate, repaired the loose shingles on the shed. I even planted bulbs in the frozen garden, hope buried under frost, waiting for spring. Every hammer tap, every sweep of the brush felt like stitching the past into something whole. One day, standing beside the garden beds, I whispered, "I'm doing my best, Grandma." And for the first time, I felt like that was enough. As winter deepened, I returned to my Navy post with my record intact, my leave reinstated, and a new perspective in my heart. My commanding officer shook my hand and said, "The Navy is proud of you, Lieutenant Commander." But it was Grandma's words that echoed most. Justice follows character. I carried that with me into every case, every hearing, every sailor's story I was trusted to defend. I carried Maple Falls with me too, and I carried that fragile new bridge forming between me and my parents, a bridge made not of money, but of slow, patient truth. Now to you listening to my story, if you've ever been abandoned, doubted, or betrayed, if you've ever had to fight for what was right while others tried to rewrite your truth, if you've ever wondered whether justice still matters, I hope my grandmother's legacy whispers something to you tonight. Justice is not a verdict, it's a way of choosing to live, a way of choosing to forgive, a way of choosing to believe in yourself, in truth, in second chances. And if this story touched you, drop a comment, tell me where you're listening from, or share your own journey. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, go ahead and subscribe. 1 second for you, a world of difference for us.